Is it a battle line? Is it a character? Is it anything to do with Superman, which might explain this type of intro? The answer there is no. What we're actually doing is finishing up our Canadian Combat Patrol video by painting up the heavy equipment that comes in the box. Namely, we've got a couple of mortars as well as a sentinel. And in this mini-series, we've kind of been focusing on different aspects in each video. And today, the sentinels as well as the mortars do have a large section of metals, so we're going to be focusing on pushing them a little bit better in this video so that we end up with a nice, quick to produce as well as good looking tabletop army, so that we have a nice fully painted army on the tabletop for any of our games. So let's jump in and see how we did it. We will naturally then be starting off with the metals, and similar to the metals across the entire army that we've done so far, we are going to be starting off with a dark brown contrast on all of the areas that we want to be our metallics. Given this is a contrast, we can be relatively confident that it's going to easily flow into all of the recesses on the models and give us a nice base coat to work from. Then what we can do is go out and dig a dark bronze or dark gold from our selection of paints, and we're going to use this in an overbrush fashion across all of the metal areas. This is very similar to dry brushing, but we're going to be depositing a greater amount of paint, giving a cleaner metallic section, but leaving the brown contrast in the recesses. By working in this way and applying first the contrast and then our base coat overbrush of metallics, what we're able to do is maintain the dark saturated colors within the recesses and not add back any bounce shine when it's looked at on the model. So we kind of have a little bit of control on where the reflections are going to be. Then what we can do is just increase the brightness as we go through. So we're going to push this a little bit further by using a brighter gold. And this we're going to be using more in a dry brush fashion as opposed to a overbrush as we've just done. Taking our brighter, punchier gold, what we want to do is dry brush this across all of our metal areas once our overbrush is dry. We do want to be relatively heavy in order to brighten up the whole area. What we want to do is try and make a decent amount of difference across the uppermost, brightest areas. And we should be able to see that in this variation between the undry brushed and post dry brushed models. However, you might be noticing that this is a little bit bright when put up against our troops. And we're going to be fixing that. What we're going to do is darken it down slightly as well as matte it out by using a flesh wash. Beyond just darkening down our previous work as well as matting out the reflectiveness and the shininess of our metallic pigments, going in with a flesh wash does also have a couple of additional benefits. First off, it's going to add a little bit more warmth to the job of paint that we've already done, which works nicely with the gold that we've used. As well as that, it's also going to reinforce and pick out any areas and sculpted details that we might have gone a little bit too heavy, let's say, with either the overbrush or the dry brush. So this will just quickly reinforce those recesses, shadows, and things like that quite nicely before we work back on bringing that shine back to those areas. We're going to want to build some nuance within the metals, and to create this, we're going to want to wait for the wash to dry fully, and then we're going to make up a mix of the two metal colors we've used so far. This mix is going to be dry brushed in a relatively heavy fashion over all of the metal areas. We want to try and make sure that we're applying enough passes in order to pick out the brightest edges as well as the main upward facing flat panels, while leaving the majority of the metal surface in that washed metal state. Then what we're going to do is take the brightest gold that we used in the process and very lightly dry brush this over all of the metallic areas. What this will do is help to pick out the very edges of the metal and give us a nice pop of color and a pop of shine, which doesn't look out of place thanks to the various layers and build up that we've done so far. At this point, we do have a choice on how we're going to paint up the armor plated sections of our vehicles and mortars. And from our base original scheme, the primary color is red for the jackets and things like that, with white kind of being the secondary accent color and everything else being built around that. So we're going to be using red for the primary armor on our vehicles as well as our mortars. And this is going to be in a very similar way as we did the red jackets on all of our troops, which are also on the mortars themselves. Except because these are large flat panels that might draw a lot of attention, what we're going to do is just add a little bit more depth to these as well. And rather than starting off with just a contrast layer of a bright red, we're going to start from a slightly darker area and come in with a darker, well, Blood Angels red in this case, a darker red contrast. And then we're going to work back up to the brighter colour that we used for the rest of the army. If we've been a little bit heavy-handed with previous steps, we can go in with a light pale dry brush to clean up any of the white areas prior to applying contrast. But assuming that's all done and everything is nice and ready for contrast application, we can apply the dark red over all of the areas that we want to be in our red armoured colour. So on the mortars, this is the armour plates, while the sentinel is going to be getting a large amount of coverage in this red. Once that contrast layer is dry, what we want to do is take a bottle of light flesh and then carefully dry brush this across all of the areas of red armour. This is going to catch predominantly the edges as well as some of the main upward facing panels and give us a nice edge highlight. This means that we can come in after it's dry with the red contrast that we've used in our original scheme. This brighter red will go all over the armour. Once that is dry, we're going to be finishing up with a combination of edge highlighting, panel highlighting, and a little bit of dry brushing using a very bright red paint. By building up the layers from the darker red up to our original brighter red that we use for the rest of the army, what we can do is make sure that the models that we are building, so the sentinel and the mortars, are consistent with the rest of the troops. They've got the same level of brightness, hue, and everything like that from the same essential highlight colors that we've used. However, because the panels on this are a lot larger than the cloth on the rest of the models, we can add a little bit more detail and nuance by starting from that darker color. However, you may notice that there is one thing missing on these models, which is the second color, our kind of accent color or second alternate color that we use in the scheme, which is white, and that's not present on any of these models. And to a degree, it is not going to be. We're going to be solving that in another way. We're going to be using silver to replace our whites. And the reason for this is we haven't used silver on any of the other models. So while it may stand out, we're going to be painting it bright enough that it will essentially replicate and represent the white from across the scheme without us needing to add in large white panels across the models that don't have sections like that we could utilize. The other thing we can do to add a little bit of white is once they're fully painted, we could chuck some white decals on there, and that will also add a little bit of flavor. In the first instance, we're going to take all of the silver areas and all of the areas that are going to be black in the rest of the army. So things like the wheels are getting a black contrast. What this is going to do in regards to the silver is help to reduce any staining of metallics that we've already laid out there, as well as help to bring out the shine of the silver in those later steps. Once the contrast is dry, what we're going to do is take a dark silver and then use this to base coat over all of the metal areas, giving us a nice reflective base coat to work from. Then it's just a simple highlight. We're going to use a mid silver and we're going to highlight all of the upper facing sections and all of the sun facing panels essentially, as well as giving a simple edge highlight to all of those lower facing panels. Then we're going to be finishing it off, and here we want to take a really bright silver and use this to edge highlight all of the upward facing edges, which will give us that nice punch of shine where the color and light will hit the most. That gives us that bright punch of reflection, and the silver is all sorted. This leaves us with only a couple of areas left. Primarily, it's going to be our accessory color that we've stuck across the entire army. And I haven't really touched on this for the simple fact of it's relating to the color of our base. We've gone for green in this case, which ties in with the base nicely. And I will go through how I've done it, but I imagine you're going to change this if you're going to be copying a similar style as this. But essentially what we did was take a dark green as a base coat, apply that all over the areas that we wanted in this color. So we've got things like pipes, details like that, and the computer screen on the mortar. Those are the areas that we've been targeting. Once that base coat's dry, we're just going to be coming in with our lighter green wash, which is going to just add a little bit of tonal difference as well as pick out some details if appropriate, before we finish it off with a lighter green highlight. And personally, I've been using this very old pot of Scorpion Green, but you can swap this out for any other green. I just really like this bright venomous green. At that point, as you can see, we are near enough done. There may be a couple of details that just need to be picked out in a chosen themed color if you have any preferences. But then we can just stick it on a base and we are all good to go. And as you can see from these photos, these were very quick to produce and are at a nice tabletop standard. So it's nice to be able to paint a force quickly and be able to play with a painted force. So that box has been ticked. And as you can see from the rest of the photos, these particular models that we focused on in this video do work nicely with the rest of the models that we've painted in the other videos. And if you have missed those other videos and need to check out how we did it, we have got that here if you are interested. However, if you've already checked that out as you're kind of on the third part of that series, I would suggest checking out the other videos in our Combat Patrol series, which have got different types of videos similar to this, where we tackle a combat patrol in a fun or time-themed manner. So do check that out if you've already seen episode 1 and 2 of this. Otherwise, do remember to subscribe so that we can see you next time.